10, 9. We have ignition sequence start. The engines are on.
You're listening to the Bible Thumping Wingnut Podcast, the podcast that's safe for the whole family.
Unless your family contains professing atheists.
Warning, the Bible Thumping Wingnut Podcast is a Christian program that may contain graphic descriptions of death, burial, and resurrection, and may not be suitable for those who deny the God who created them. Repentance and faith is advised.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Bible Thumping Wingnut Podcast. Len is thrilled with me. He never knows what kind of introduction I'm going to play. I don't blame him because usually I play the wrong one. We are still at G3 in Atlanta, Georgia. It's a privilege to be here. We are at our exhibitor booth, and we have met a lot of wonderful Christians who listen to the podcast. We have a new website. Go to BibleThumpingWingnut.com. Check that out. Lots of content there, different content creators. We've got 10 podcasts on one network, the Bible Thumping Wingnut Network. And we have guests today that we've never had on before. These gentlemen, one being Scott Klusendorf. Many people will relate to Wretched Radio, and he has a co-minister with him by the name of Jay Watts. We're looking forward to meeting you both for the first time and sharing your ministry with our audience. Your ministry is called Life Training Institute, focusing on the issue of abortion. Scott Klusendorf, Jay Watts, welcome to the Bible Thumping Wingnut Podcast. How are you today?
Good to be with you. Thanks for having us.
I think your microphone is turned off.
Yep, sure enough. You know, there we are.
There you go.
Good to be with you.
Good to have you. Probably our listeners are most like me. I'm assuming the listeners are most like they equate you with Wretched, and you did with Todd Friel on abortion. Tell us how that started, what that's about if they haven't seen it, and how that relates to Life Training Institute and what you do now.
Well, Life Training Institute equips pro-life Christians to make a case for the pro-life view. And my co-host on the show is with us here, Jay Watts. And what we try to do as an organization is give solid reasons for what we believe. A lot of pro-life groups do very broad work. They go and do abstinence talks. They speak to women in crisis pregnancy. They work on counseling skills. We are more narrow. We deal with the apologetics. Why should one think that the pro-life view is true and reasonable to believe? And that's what we focused on with Life is Best. That's what we focus on when we speak in schools. As Jay will mention, I'm sure he speaks in high schools all over this nation. There's none better. Goes into Catholic and Protestant high schools, makes a case for the pro-life view, speaks at conferences. And we just work on communicating one simple thing. Why is the pro-life view true and reasonable to believe? Very narrow in our focus.
So what was the nature of, you just came out of a breakout session. What was the nature of your discussion over there? What was the message you were trying to communicate?
What should a church committed to the principles of the Protestant Reformation do to be a pro-life church? That was the essence of it, and I gave three things. Number one, that church is going to convey a biblical view of human value. Number two, it's going to equip its members to engage a culture that does not hold to our view of the Bible. In other words, they reject religion, real and knowable. And thirdly, they're going to present a cross-centered gospel of men and women who've disqualified themselves because of sexual sin, which will include abortion. And it will convey to those people that the hope found in the gospel of Jesus means they can have a place in saving lives too.
Amen. So, brother, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Jay? Sorry.
Oh, no problem. I came to, it's interesting, I've been talking all day at the tables with people about this, because one of the questions that comes up a lot when they come to the table is, I want to do something, but I don't know what that something is. And what I tell all of them is that the biggest lie in our culture today, I think, is that this issue is intractable, which means there's no movement on it, that everybody's either on one side or the other. Now, I stand as evidence against that because when I was younger, I was a pro-choice atheist. I was on the other side of this argument. And so I tell them the same thing. Everybody that asks me, what's the first thing that I ought to do? I say, you ought to find the resources to equip yourself to be able to answer this question. What are the unborn? Because the central issue on whether or not abortion is good or bad, right or wrong, one of the greatest moral sins that the world has ever seen or not, will depend on how we answer that question. And so I answered that question long after I became a Christian and settled on the issue that I'd seen enough evidence that the unborn were fully human, that the science of embryology demonstrated that they were human beings, human life from the moment they came into existence, and that good philosophy teaches us that the intuition that we have that it's wrong to do something to another human being is grounded in the idea that human beings are the kind of thing that are valuable by virtue of what they are, not what other people think about them, not whether they're convenient or not what they role they play in society. It's what we are. And as Christians, we would understand that as the image bearers of God, that being the image bearers of God is what gives us value. And once I determined that that was the truth of the world that I lived in, that the unborn were fully valuable and that what we did to them was wrong, then I recognized on my own the requirement to take action in our culture, that you can't simultaneously hold the view that the unborn are fully human, to which we have obligations, the same basic duties and obligations that we have to any other human being, not the least of which is just to not kill them. And that we live in a world where they're being killed. In the United States now, we just got the most recent numbers, still hovering at nearly 1 million a year, right around that place, about 40 million a year worldwide. You live in that world and believe that they're human, then you are required to do something.
Jay, we have a large audience that is unbelievers on our YouTube channel. This is not only going on our YouTube channel, it's going on our podcast feed where we have mostly Christians, but watching us within the next 24 hours of broadcasting this will be many atheists who will say, prove it. Prove that it's a human being. I mean, all the arguments of that you've ever heard. I mean, those are the ones that will be commented on this video.
Okay.
It'll be like it's what do they say? It's like a leech or a parasite or a growth. It's my body. I can do what I want. If it can't live on its own, then it's not a human. You've heard all the arguments, I'm sure. Yes. So to the skeptic who's watching, who first of all would say you were never an atheist. So that's another conversation we would love to have on this YouTube channel. But make your argument that baby after conception, at the moment of conception, has the same right as that mother.
Well, it's a two-pronged argument. It begins first on identifying this unborn life, for the moment it comes into existence, scientifically speaking, as a human organism, that it's undoubtedly human. The science of embryology tells us that from the moment it comes into existence as an embryo, as a zygote, we're talking about a whole, distinct, and living human organism. So at that moment of fertilization is the beginning of a new organism, and that organism is undoubtedly human. It is whole. It's not a part of something else because it doesn't serve the other organism, the mother's organism, in any capacity whatsoever. As a matter of fact, the very first thing that happens when it comes into existence is a glycoprotein shell called the zona pellucida hardens to defend itself from any other sperm getting into there, which would mess it up its development from the very beginning. It defends itself and cuts itself off from the other organism as its first action, is acting independently from the moment it comes into existence. So it's whole, it's distinct, it's not like any cell in the body of its mother and its father, and it's living. It meets every single requirement that you would need to be able to categorize something as a living organism, and things that meet far fewer requirements are argued all the time over whether or not they're human, like viruses or things like that. We can have protracted arguments of whether or not a virus is a living organism. That human life, from the moment it comes into existence, fulfills far more requirements, all of them to be considered a whole, distinct, and living human organism. So scientifically speaking, there is no way around it. The second question will be a question of philosophy. I think I'll let you take on doing that.
There is an ominous presence.
Well, we, as Christians, argue that science tells us what the unborn is, but philosophy tells us how to value that living thing. And Jay is exactly right. The science is clear. From the very beginning, a distinct, living, whole human being. That's what embryology textbooks teach. But science can't tell me how to treat you. Science can't say I shouldn't kick your shins right now while I'm talking to you doing this interview because I'd rather leave early and go get something to eat. Instead, I got to do a little philosophy. Philosophy tells me there's no essential difference between that embryo you were and the adult you are today that would justify killing you back then. Differences of size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency are not good reasons for saying we could kill you then, but not now. So let's take what Jay said and what I said and put it in a 1-minute defense of the pro-life view. Here it is. From the earliest stages of development, you were a distinct, living, whole human being. You weren't part of another human being like these skin cells on the back of my hand that I'm pinching. You were already a whole living member of the human family. And you know what else? There's no essential difference between that embryo you were and the adult you are today that would justify killing you. Your differences of size, level of development, environment, degree of dependency are not good reasons for saying you could be killed then, but not now. Now, there's one exception to all of this, and it's right here. This guy. This guy right here.
No, just do your thing.
Well, we already finished our thing. You were late,
Say
but
something
but
good.
now there will be, say something good. There will be people who will take issue with this. They will say, wait a minute, how can that be a living human being when twinning can occur? Well, how does it follow that because an embryo may split, that it wasn't a whole living thing prior to the split? If you cut a flatworm in half, what do you get? You get 2 flatworms. Does it follow there was no flatworm prior to the split? Or they may say, look, that's not a living human being, because after all, women don't grieve miscarriages the way they grieve the death of a newborn or toddler. Wait a minute. How does my feeling about something change what it is? If I learn that one of my own children died while I'm talking to you, I'm going to feel worse about that than hearing that 300 children died in India today, but it doesn't follow my own kid is more human and valuable than those 300. It just means I'm more emotionally attached to my own kid.
Great argument. Great argument. You know, we tried to for those of you who were watching on the video, Todd Friel came and he was trying to steal the show, and you know we tried to ignore him, and then he just came and took over. So you have to check out the video of what just happened. Yes. All right, Len.
It seems to me that in light of all of this science, that the atheist who science is their God, I mean, they worship at the altar of science, that in the face of all this science, the massive inconsistency is that they'll deny this. They will deny these so clearly evident and irrefutable scientific facts. And I believe it has a lot to do with their love of sin, and that it's because they value their sexual libertarianism far more than they value human life. What would your response to that be?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there are people that I have talked to in communications after talks that people often line up to have conversation with you. And certainly there are people that have staked a position because of what they're capable of doing by virtue of that position. I remember one young man talking to me and he said, Mr. Watts, you will never know how free I was the moment I ceased to believe in Christianity. There was a freedom that came with it, a freedom to do what he wanted to do. So I wouldn't deny that is an element for some people out there. For certain it is. And my response to him was, I have absolutely no doubt that you gained a lot of freedom when you made the decision to disavow yourself of your Christian beliefs. Now let's have a conversation about what the cost of that freedom was. What it was, and not just in the sense of for those of us who are Christians who live in that active relationship with God, but also a consistency in the way that we experience the world, lining up with the way that we understand the world. And those being two different things. I experience the right and wrong of the world. Even people who will deny the existence of objective moral values will tell you that they think murder is wrong. They think rape is wrong. They just refuse to make that an objective standard. And so you have these conversations where I will draw them out of that. I've gone through a whole list of one young man I remember out in San Francisco where he constantly affirmed that everything that I thought was wrong was in fact wrong in his mind, but he could not accept that it was wrong for everybody. And I asked him, isn't it even easier for you to accept at this moment that objective moral values just exist for all of us than it is that you and I, who grew up in different parts of the country, in different cultures, with different parents and different worldviews, have somehow magically come to believe that all of the same things are right and wrong? And so there is an element out there. I always try to because of where I came from, and you made I think it's funny because you made the claim that some people will claim that I wasn't an atheist. I think it's weird because sometimes people say that to me, like, well, you weren't an atheist. Why would you say something that stupid? I would never, ever deny that you believe the things that you say that you believe. So why on earth would you claim that the things that I'm telling you are false about myself? I understand that I was a mess of ideas, and there was no clear reason for anything that I was holding. And when I was pro-choice, one of the most easily refutable arguments was one that I said all the time, that as a man, I ought not to be involved in this conversation, which now, from the position that I argue, I recognize is nothing but a raw ad hominem attack.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's arguing the person. It's to the man. I'm saying that your arguments are flawed because of what you are or who you are. That's ridiculous.
Instead of dealing with the substance of the argument
That's right.
itself.
Arguments are not gender. They aren't male or female. But that was the kind of thing I would say, and I would say it angrily, and I would say it with aggression, and I believed that there was strength or power. All that to say is that I would never want to say that a group of people argue or believe what they do because of a clear understanding, because I can testify for myself, there was no clear understanding of what I was doing when I was doing those things. I had reasons without reasons, if that makes sense. I would say things, but they weren't backed up by a deep thinking process that gave me this belief system. But of course, I did like the freedom of being able to do what I wanted. So
right.
I agree with that.
Right. So let's get really practical here, because we're not all apologists, right? Some of us are just we're like Moses. We don't speak well. We don't communicate well with others, but we hear these things as Christians, and sometimes it takes a while for us to really come to understand the importance of this issue. And so for the person who's listening, who struggles with this, they're feeling the conviction, they feel the need to communicate it. What is the action? What is the call to action here for the Christian on this issue of abortion? Step one.
Well, step one is people who are not heartbroken over abortion will generally not make sacrifices to stop it. So that is why in our presentations at Life Training Institute, we will use a very short video clip that depicts abortion. And your listeners can find that at caseforlife.com. And right there on the homepage at caseforlife.com, we have that video. It's right there. But the point of the video is not to shock and not to use emotion in place of good arguments, but as valuable adjuncts to good arguments. Did you see the movie, for example, Hacksaw Ridge?
Not yet, but I'm really...
Saving Private Ryan.
Yes.
Schindler's List.
Yes.
Passion of the Christ.
Yes.
These were very disturbing films, but they conveyed truth that words alone never could. So when Christians say to me, how do I make others around me want to take this on? Well, I say you got to change their feeling as a predicate to changing their thinking. And then what you do is you give them facts and arguments that are easily understood, easily communicated. Christians tend to complicate this. They tend to think that unless you convert people to Christ, you'll never change their hearts on abortion. That's false. That is absolutely false. We didn't end slavery by converting the whole country to Christ. We didn't end racial segregation by converting the whole country to Christ. Now, that's one way God reaches the culture, but it limits him because God gives us another way, and that is through civil law and cultural engagement. In fact, civil law presupposes hearts won't be changed. That's why we need laws to control the heartless. So what we want to do as Christians is be able to make a case to the culture that they cannot dismiss as just a private, subjective religious view. And that's why what Jay just gave you was so powerful. When he said, here's the science of embryology, he laid it right out there. He didn't cite a Bible verse. The skeptic has to answer his argument. If the skeptic says, well, that's just your religious view, that's a category error.
Right.
Like asking, how tall is the number 5? Arguments are true or false, valid or invalid. You can't refute them by attacking the person, by calling Jay a man or me a man. You can't refute it by calling it religious. You have to deal with the argument. So Christians need to know how to do that. Once they have confidence that their view is true, they're more willing to engage. And that's why we spend our time doing that.
Okay. So legislation, let's talk about that. We talked about an issue before we went live on the podcast, And this is the issue of immediatism versus incrementalism.
Sure.
The immediatist, as I understand the position, says that all abortion is murder, and murder is, of course, a breaking of God's law. It's a breaking of, obviously, of natural law, and therefore any abortion legislation ought to be the immediate dismissal and abolition of abortion and criminalized completely. What are your thoughts on immediatism?
Well, Jay and I have written an article about this at the Gospel Coalition that your listeners can look if they want to look up about what do we do on this particular subject. But here's the thing you've got to ask yourself. Your job as a Christian is to limit the evil and promote the good insofar as possible, given what you have to work with. And my problem with that group that says you've got to ban all abortion right now, immediately, is this: show me the votes for that. So they're willing to let 90% of unborn children die and be butchered because they can't save all of them. And then they accuse us of compromising. Wait a minute, we're not the ones compromising. It's the pro-abortionists who are compromising. Their position is no unborn child has a right to life. All of them can be killed. And now they can't get that. Now there's 90% that are going to be protected. Now, if your view is that you want the 10% that, let's just say, their babies conceived through rape, it's not that high, but just for argument's sake, if your position is you want that to be the case, and that's your principle, then you're compromising, then you're morally untutored. But if you're working to save all children, and while you work to save all children, you save as many as you can along the way, you're not the one compromising. It's the other side. Jay, you want to add to that?
Yeah. Another problem, too, that I have with this discussion, and by the way, I don't have a problem when it's a graciously held position. That's a different thing. The anti-slavery movement was a massive, broad movement that had free soilers and hardcore abolitionists and anti-slavery people. There were a lot of people that were working to end slavery, and they came at it from different angles. So when people just graciously hold different positions, then it's fine. It's when it becomes ungracious and when it becomes an occasion to attack. And when somebody says that the pro-lifer who disagrees with them on the tactics to reach the same goal, we have the exact same goal. When you disagree on the tactics, you're characterized as having blood on your hands. That's when it becomes, to me, something difficult. For me, there is a question when somebody says this, coming from the way that I come at things, and I've asked a couple of them directly this as we're talking. I say, show me the point in human history where we ever got everything all at one time. I went to see the movie Amazing Grace with my family. My kids were thrilled. If you've seen the story of William Wilberforce. At the end of the movie, there is this applause and cheering and all of this celebrating for what would amount under that definition that we've been offered as an incremental step to the ultimate abolition of slavery. That's not the abolition of slavery at the end of that movie.
Right.
That's the end of the slave trade. It was the step he could get to. And it was a step that when you watch the movie is a moment of celebration. But by this definition, it becomes a compromise, a sellout. William Wilberforce is now a supporter of slavery. Another place where you saw this.
Can I interrupt? Because that's their argument. That organization focuses on slavery and says abolition, abolition, abolition only, and you just destroyed that argument.
And William Lloyd Garrison and Frederick Douglass worked together early on, and Frederick Douglass saw him as a mentor and someone who guided him. When they broke from each other, because you would say Frederick Douglass, the former slave, became more pragmatic because his idea was, I want as many slaves freed as possible. And so he began to work to end slavery for the slave, the specific slave, as opposed to in total, which William Lloyd Garrison saw as a compromise, to the point which people like William Lloyd Garrison actually attacked Frederick Douglass when he allowed an Englishman to offer to buy his freedom for him so that he could be completely free of slavery. His counter argument to this was, I appreciate your principles, but I just want to be free.
Right.
And so it's easy for you to hold a principle that allows other people to stay in slavery. At the same point here, I understand the passion and I completely agree with the goal, but it's far too easy for those of us whose lives are protected to demand high principles when it's not our life that would be lost for the cost of that mistake.
Right. So let's talk, and maybe we'll end here because we want to be respectful of your time here, gentlemen. I know we're getting a little bit close here. So what is your feeling or response to abortion mill ministry? People who stand in front of abortion mills holding signs, preaching the gospel, by the way, but who might also, in their preaching and presentation of the gospel, call abortion murder. Please don't murder your baby. Please don't go in there. They murder babies there. What is your response to that?
Okay. I think when we use the term murder, we are using a term that the culture does not understand, does not accept. I'd rather not use loaded language they're going to reject out of hand before they've heard my syllogism, heard my argument. I'd rather show them the evil. Let them see abortion. Now, should we do that in front of...
But they're walking in. Like the death score is walking them in.
Yeah. Now, here's the question. We don't have an answer for it. It's an empirical one, and I've not done the research on it. I'll just tell you the two sides and then tell you what I think. There are pro-lifers who say the last thing the woman should see before she goes into that clinic is the aborted children pictures. Okay. There are others who say, no, we have a lot of decades of doing this. The most important last message for that woman is, we will help you. Now, if you're committed to saving lives, you're going to go for the one that's most helpful at that last stop, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
My friend Eric Scheidler, who has got a lot of experience doing this, not only him, but his dad doing decades of pro-life work in front of abortion clinics.
Yes.
Eric had an interesting observation. He said, what we have found through our study is that if we position the abortion pictures on the road leading into the clinic, but the last stop is the message, we will help you, we save more children than if we put those pictures right at the entrance of the clinic. So as a Christian, I want to save children.
Yes.
So if you're out there and you're saying to women as they go in, you are murdering your baby, repent, believe the gospel, and your last message to them isn't helping save that child, you are failing that child. You are not being smart. You're not being biblically wise as a serpent, and children are dying because of what you do. Now, because I don't have the empirical data to prove that is what's happening, I'm simply arguing against those who would say that's what we must do. Oh, really? What about those who have good evidence to show the we will help you message is the best final message? Put the pictures further up the road.
Yes.
So
I got to say to you, my background is with Babies Are Murdered Here.
Yeah.
That the founder of that used to be my pastor, and I've hold fast to that. So when you first said that, I was like, gulp.
Yeah, I noticed you gulping a little. I was about to give you,
but your argument makes sense. It makes sense, and I accept it. I see the reasoning in that.
Again, it's back to a lot of times we put people in a binary thinking mode. It's either do this or do that.
Right.
Why can't we do both? Why can't we both preach the gospel,
Yes.
say we will help you,
Yes.
and as part of our proclamation, sure, let people see what abortion is, but there's wisdom in knowing how to do this prudentially without sacrificing principle.
So,
And
go
can
ahead.
I say one more thing
Yes,
too on
please.
that? That is to build on that message, one of the things that I have told people in conversations when we get to this either or place is that though we have chosen different strategies towards the same goal, if you accomplish that goal, you will have nobody celebrating your accomplishment more than me.
Right.
I'm
Right.
not against you. I
Right.
just don't think the way you're trying to do it will work. And so when you ask me, should I do it this way? And I honestly don't believe what you're going to do will work. That is when it's frustrating when someone comes back and says it's your fault to me that it failed because you didn't support me. Well, I told you all along I wasn't a fan of the way that you were doing it. I always wanted the same thing you wanted in the end game. I just never believed the tactic that you were going to take was going to be a successful one. Again, if we can graciously hold the different tactics and try to figure out what works best, and,
Yes.
and as Scott said, get evidence.
Right.
It's not what I
Right.
feel. It's not what I think. I want evidence that what we're doing is working. If you can show me evidence you can accomplish it, you're going to get me a lot farther along with you. If the immediate thing is my way or you're compromised,
Right.
then we lose we lose the unity that we must have in order to make it. I told somebody at the table over there a second ago when they asked me, how do we get going on this? I said, you got to talk.
Yep.
You got to learn to talk. You got to be equipped to talk, and you got to keep talking. Because if it's only Scott and I talking, you're right. Nothing will ever get done.
Right.
But if it's millions of Americans talking, things change.
Right.
And so the unity that we need to be able to make that kind of move, it doesn't have to be a unity that says we all agree with each other on the best way to reach these goals. It just has to be a gracious understanding that when you have chosen tactics that I don't believe are going to work, I'm not going to get behind you. I'm going to keep pursuing my own tactics that I do think will work, and let's see who does the best.
Well, let's end on this, gentlemen. Perhaps you could point people to resources. Of course, we have your website, which you shared with us, and I encourage you to share again. But for those who are doing ministry on the ground in front of abortion mills, who you said the last message they should hear is "we will help you," how do they set up a structure for setting up adoption and things like that? Where is there a website or a ministry that deals specifically with the handoff, if you will? Or is this something that's more of a local church? Your local church has to set this up and be willing to be the hands and feet of Jesus here and take that baby if that's what the mother chooses to do.
Let me address the theological reasons why Christians should be in favor of adoption. And then I want to make a hedge comment here. Our organization is a pro-life apologetics organization. And as I said, we're very narrow in what we do. So we are not experts at how to facilitate adoption. That would be better served by a local crisis pregnancy center who could refer that couple to a pro-life legal team that could assist with that. So I don't want to pretend to know what we don't know there. But let me tell you why you're right on about why as Christians adoption should never be written off our radar. The gospel is that God the Father took rebels against him. He didn't take unwanted people, you know. He didn't just take a kid who's unwanted. He took someone who was a rebel.
Yes.
Who deliberately set himself against his purposes. And God saved me by absorbing the wrath I deserve, but he didn't stop there. He then adopted me into his family as a child he loves. That's the Christian story of adoption. If that's the gospel story, how on earth can you be a gospel Christian and rule out completely that you will ever be willing to adopt? Now, that's not to say every Christian must.
Right.
I'm saying those who categorically say, I would never consider that, I wonder if they fully appreciate the gospel in its emphasis on how God adopted us.
Yes.
I would say to your listeners, though, on the practical side, if they want to get help with adoption, groups like NIFLA, perhaps CareNet, Heartbeat, are pregnancy center organizations that know how to direct people that way. Us as a pro-life organization that's geared toward apologetics, we're just not the experts on that.
Okay, I'm going to hand the microphone over and
to me, Life Training Institute. The website again.
ProLifeTraining.com or CaseForLife.com. Either one of the ProLifeTraining.com will take you to our organizational website. Case for Life will take you to a page that makes the case for life and equips anybody who goes there to be able to do in 2 minutes what Scott did earlier, to make the case for life.
Great. I encourage our audience to check that out. Jay Watts, you need to get your information because I think our skeptics going to want to see you back on the Bible Thumping Wingnut YouTube channel. Do some Christian apologetics, answer some of their charges against you. I'm sure that they'd be glad to engage with you.
Yeah.
As you roll your eyes.
Now, I had one guy come after me really strong one time about it, and I said, I know there are a lot of people that have this story. I don't know why it's so hard to believe at this point. I mean, J. Warner Wallace is a friend of ours, cold case detective, Holly Ordway at Houston Baptist University. I mean, we could go on over and over again. Craig Keener, great writer. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about a number of people out there that have this story. I don't know why it's so difficult to believe at this point. It's fairly common.
Scott Klusendorf, Jay Watts, thank you very much. Tremendous need for your ministry. May God bless you for all that you do. And thank you very much for coming on the Bible Thumping Wingnut podcast.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate you guys. What a name. I've never been on a better named show.
Amen. Now, that's what we like to hear.
Do I get a Wingnut t-shirt or something?
You do.
Oh,
you
wow.
absolutely do.
All right, I'm there.
All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning into the Bible Thumping Wingnut podcast. We're live here from G3 Conference in Atlanta, Georgia. Stay tuned. Subscribe to this YouTube channel if you haven't already. More content coming up in the next day and a half while we remain here at the conference, and then lots of other content that's available. Go to BibleThumpingWingnut.com for all that we got going on. So thanks for watching. Until next time, may God bless.